What are you doing here? This place is off limits to strangers. My son and his wife, who had been living with me, were moving out to their newly built detached house. Their new home was completed, and today was the housewarming party for their friends. Thinking it would be nice, I decided to join in the celebration, but my son and his wife turned me away at the gate, and on top of that, said something outrageous. If you really want to enter so badly, pay an entrance fee of $1,000. I was dumbfounded by her horrible words. To call me a stranger, even though I'm technically their mother-in-law and had lived with them until recently. To ask for an entrance fee when I came for a housewarming gift. And to do so with a smirk, demanding such an outrageous amount. As I mulled over what she had said, a boiling anger began to surge within me. Looking back, she had always been an incredibly rude person since we lived together. Looking down on me, hurling insults, treating me like a servant, pushing chores and the care of their children onto me. Especially with the grandchildren, she would frequently leave them with me to go out and have fun. My son was completely on her side, making it hard to believe we used to have a good relationship before he got married. Enough was enough. I was at my breaking point. I was determined to give them a thorough lesson. With a poker face, I looked at them and said, "All right, then I'll be leaving." Seeing that they had succeeded in driving me away, my son and his wife burst into triumphant laughter. Turning my back on them and their new home, I headed straight to a certain place. 3 days later. Hey! What the heck is this all about? The reason my son and his wife came rushing into our house, pale as ghosts, was quite the story. My name is Talia. Ever since our only son, Harry, got a job and left home, it's just been my husband and me in this big house. Even though I call him my son, Harry, and I don't share any blood relation. He's the child of my husband and his previous wife. But blood relation or not, I've always loved Harry as my own, and he's always treated me like his real mom. After Harry moved out on his own, I felt a bit lonely, but there was also a sense of relief from being freed from child-rearing, and I've been enjoying my days working and spending time with my husband. Both my husband and I work for a company owned by my brother-in-law. It's a small family-run business where most of the managerial positions are held by relatives. Since we're both working and hold managerial positions, I believe we're able to live a relatively affluent life. We were living these ordinary, happy days, never expecting what life was about to throw at us. Life is unpredictable, after all. 3 years after starting his job, Harry married a woman who also worked at the same company. She was stunningly beautiful with a great figure, the kind of woman 10 out of 10 people would call gorgeous. Seeing them smile at each other during their first meeting and their wedding, I felt very reassured. Sometime after their marriage, I received the news that Harry's wife was pregnant. Oh, congratulations! When is the baby due? Thanks. The due date is still quite a way off. Why do you sound so gloomy? I was excited to hear the news about my first grandchild and offered my congratulations, but Harry's voice was heavy with concern. Was there already a problem? When I asked, worried, Harry started to speak in a feeble voice, actually. According to Harry, his wife takes great pride in her appearance. Since getting pregnant, she's been struggling with her belly getting bigger and her body changing, becoming increasingly hysterical. Every night she steps on the scale, looks downhearted, and screams when she looks in the mirror. Harry tries to comfort her by saying, "It's just a sign that the baby is growing well. It's not because you're getting fat, but it seems to have the opposite effect on her." It seems that my son's wife was growing increasingly frustrated, feeling that my son wasn't understanding her struggles, interpreting him as an unsupportive husband. She was berating him almost daily, and it sounded like he couldn't take it anymore. "I can't support her on my own, please help me," he pleaded with tears in his voice, asking if they could move in with us. Honestly, I didn't think moving in with us would distract her from her feelings, and given that we're both working during the day, I didn't see how we could offer much support. However, sympathizing with my son, who felt he'd collapse if he had to continue living alone with his wife, my husband and I discussed it and decided to welcome them into our home. After my son and his wife moved in, my impression of her only worsened. It started from her very first comment on moving day, which was a mockery of our home. "What's with this house? It's so old and dingy. Plus, it's cold. Oh, I wish we stayed in our apartment even if it was smaller." Our home is a traditional Victorian-style house that's been in my husband's family since his grandfather's time. It's charming in its way, but admittedly old in many respects. It's prone to drafts, so her complaints weren't unfounded. However, as someone about to live with us, it seemed utterly disrespectful to openly criticize our home in front of us, the homeowners and her in-laws. But her bad behavior didn't stop at mocking our home. "Hey, old woman, can you make dinner quickly? And make sure you clean up properly. It's unbelievable how dusty it gets inside. What if something happens to the baby because of it?" My son's wife began treating me like a servant and throwing derogatory comments my way. I reprimanded her once for such behavior, but she retorted, "I'm pregnant. What if I miscarry because of the stress?" and refused to change her impolite attitude. Despite doubting that such things would cause a miscarriage, I was aware that pregnant women are delicate and shouldn't be stressed. I hoped that once the baby was born, her attitude would improve. Perhaps she was just irritable because things weren't going her way during pregnancy. Her hormonal balance must be off, and she must be having a hard time. With this in mind, I had no choice but to remain silent and choose to endure her brutality. A few months after they moved in, my son's wife gave birth to a healthy baby. My husband and I were overjoyed at the arrival of our much-awaited first grandchild. Exhausted from the birth, the usually noisy daughter-in-law was quiet for a while, allowing us to enjoy a brief period of peace. However, about a month after the birth of the grandchild, our household became even more miserable than before the delivery. First off, not long after the birth of my grandson, my husband was killed in a car accident. I was left in shock by the sudden loss of my husband. While drowning in deep sorrow, I managed the funeral and returned home. In the living room, my son's wife, who had claimed she couldn't handle the stress of the funeral because she was postpartum, was sitting heavily on the sofa my husband always used. She noticed my return and hurled insults. "Now that he's gone, the house feels so much bigger." Oh, what a relief. I couldn't believe the words she snorted through her nose and doubted my ears. But she continued to speak ill of my late husband, making it clear that her disrespect was heartfelt. True, my husband was a workaholic, but I respected and loved him for his dedication. To have my son's wife, who barely knew him and always complained, mock him was infuriating. As I was about to retort, my son said something unbelievable. "Yeah, really. He was never home but always had something to nag about when he was. It was so annoying." My son who took advantage of his wife and started belittling her husband. I had hoped he would reprimand her, but instead, he said the exact opposite. Speechless at their audacity, they seemed satisfied with their venting and retreated to their bedroom. After that, my son's attitude changed. Until now, no matter how much his wife belittled or mistreated me, he would not chide her and remained a bystander. But after my husband's death, he began to agree with her entirely, berating and ordering me around. My son, who never had a major rebellious phase and always had a good relationship with me as his stepmother, had suddenly turned so cruel. Could this be the influence of his wife? However, it seemed I was the only one who felt his attitude had shifted so drastically. Apparently, the reason my son's wife acted so condescendingly towards me was that my son told her I was not his real mother. I know. You're not Harry's real mom, right? I heard he could never really see you as his mom. Plus, you were always so annoying, trying to mother him all the time. I heard he's been wanting to move out for ages but just put up with it for his dad's sake. When she told me that, I felt as if the ground had crumbled beneath my feet. I couldn't believe my son felt that way about me. As she sneered and said, "So, I really have no reason to respect you, do I?" Before walking away, I watched her back in stunned silence. Moreover, my son and his wife's behavior began to escalate. They didn't just hurl insults at me anymore, but started dumping their child on me to go out and enjoy themselves. Completely disregarding my schedule, they would go out day or night with friends, indulging in shopping sprees or parties. At times, they even took overnight trips for the weekend, leaving their infant child with me. What were they thinking, leaving a baby to gallivant around? Despite my protests every time they pushed their child on me, they wouldn't listen. Worse, they would say things like, "You should be grateful to spend time with your adorable grandchild." And the worst part was them leaving their crying baby with me at night. "Hey, I was sleeping so well, and you woke me up. Make it stop crying, will you?" It's unbearable being woken up every night like this. Make sure the baby doesn't cry at night, okay? It's natural for babies to cry at night. No matter how well you take care of them during the day, babies will cry. To demand that I, and not they, should solve this is absurd. Do they lack parental awareness? Though I'm filled with resentment, if I refuse to take care of my grandchild, they'd probably just neglect him. Unable to abandon my dear grandchild, I found myself stuck with taking care of him as they demanded. As time passed, years went by. My grandson grew up healthy and gradually became less of a handful, truly in his most adorable phase. Yet, my son and his wife continued to leave him with me while they went out. One day, when this had become the norm, my daughter-in-law suddenly made an outrageous demand. "I'm sick of this old, crumbling house, I can't stand it anymore." Since the beginning of our living together, she had always complained about our old Victorian-style house. Whether she had finally reached her limit or because leaving the grandchild with me no longer felt like a burden, she started throwing tantrums about wanting to move to a brand new house. To my dismay, my son joined in, saying, "Actually, I've always hated living in this old-fashioned house," and expressed a desire to move. Despite their complaints, I thought they wouldn't actually move. I lived shutting out their constant grumbling. But a few months later, my son and his wife really did purchase prime real estate in the city center and built a new house to move into. Finally, we can say goodbye to that rundown house. Though I had my reservations, I also breathed a sigh of relief, thinking I was finally free from them. On the day their new house was completed, I visited to see their new place as a form of celebration. There, I found many people, including my daughter-in-law's friends and her parents, visiting. Surrounded by a crowd, my son and his wife were proudly showing off their new home. They seem busy, so I'll just take a quick look around and then leave, I thought as I approached them. However, they rejected me with a look of disdain. "What are you doing here? This place is off limits to strangers." I was taken aback by being called a stranger and denied entry. Right after that, as if she had thought of something amusing, she smirked and said, "If you really want to come in, then pay an entrance fee of $1,000. I was shocked by such an outrageous demand. To call me a stranger, even though I'm technically their mother-in-law and we lived together until recently. To ask for an entrance fee just to visit for a housewarming. And to do so with a smirk, demanding such an exorbitant amount. As I processed what she had said, a boiling anger began to surge within me. Reflecting on our time living together, she had always been incredibly rude. Looking down on me, hurling insults, treating me like a servant, pushing chores and the care of their child onto me. Especially regarding their child, she would frequently leave him with me to go out and have fun. My son was completely on her side, making it hard to believe we used to have a good parent-child relationship before he got married. It might be unavoidable that he can't think of me as his mother, but I've always considered him my true son and believed I raised him with love. Yet, the moment my husband died, they stopped pretending and began to mock me. Doesn't he feel any gratitude for how he was raised? I was seething with anger, feeling as though my kindness had been repaid with betrayal. I've reached my breaking point. I'm going to get back at them thoroughly. With that determination in my heart, I looked at them expressionlessly and said, "All right, then I'll be going." "What, you're leaving without even coming in after making the trip here?" "Well, don't bother coming back again," they said, laughing loudly as they sent me away. Turning my back on them and their new house, I went home and then straight to the bank. 3 days later. "Hey! What in the world is this about?" My son and his wife, looking pale as ghosts, came storming into my house. They barged in with such force it was as if they were about to break the door, but I dealt with them outside, not letting them in. Keep it down. You're disturbing the neighbors. The bank account is empty. What's this all about? I scolded, not bothering to hide my annoyance, but my daughter-in-law snapped back as if she couldn't care less about my attitude. The bank account is empty. Knowing exactly what she was referring to, I suppressed the urge to laugh and coolly replied, "Oh, the bank account. I've moved all the money to another bank account. From now on, you'll be paying for your own living expenses and mortgage. And of course, that includes clothes and drinks." Wah! My son and his wife were speechless at my response. In fact, ever since they began living with us, they had been using my bank account for all their expenses. Not just for living costs like food and child-rearing expenses for my grandson, but also the lavish spending on clothes and luxury goods, and even the down payment and land purchase for their new house, were all paid from my account. Looking back, I wish I hadn't spoiled him so much, but ever since I remarried his father, I've always felt sympathy for my son. Losing his biological mother at a young age and then his father right after his own child was born, I wanted to support him as a mother, even if we weren't related by blood. In fact, I felt I had to. That's why I endured all the verbal abuse and mistreatment, thinking doing whatever I could for him was my way of showing love. But this incident with their new house was the last straw. If my son had become such a foolish person, I thought I might as well give up on him. Perhaps my husband had foreseen a day like this would come. He used to say, "If anything happens to me, cut ties with my son and his wife." When I first heard this, having no bad feelings towards them, I was shocked and asked why he would say something like that. He then shared his feelings that our son was foolish in many ways and that the woman he chose as his wife was trouble. He spoke with specific examples, but at the time, I couldn't believe they would act in such a way and wondered if my husband was just imagining things. Still, the fact that my usually reserved husband spoke so strongly left an impression on me, and his words lingered in my mind after he passed away. Every time I was mistreated by my son and his wife, I would pray at my husband's altar for advice. And this time, I declared, I think it's time to let go of my son, before heading to the bank. Maybe being cut off from the bank account and losing access to the money they freely used hit them hard. They stood dumbfounded, their faces ashen. "Is that all you have to say? Then please leave." "Wait, wait!" My son tried to stop me as I entered the house, reaching for the door. I slapped his hand away and faced them. "Sorry, but this house is off limits to strangers. If you're willing to pay an entrance fee of $1,000, I might consider letting you in." Wah! Repeating the words my daughter-in-law had said to me back to them, they were petrified. They were outraged but ended up leaving without a word. I thought I was finally freed from this trouble, but it wasn't that easy. The next day, my son and his wife showed up at my house again. "Morning, Mom. Sorry about yesterday. Seems like we both got a bit carried away. Are you mad? Oh, Mother, you look tired. May I give you a shoulder massage?" Their tone had completely changed from the day before, as if they were now trying to gauge my mood. My daughter-in-law, who had never called me mother before, started doing so while trying to be sweet with body contact. Their behavior, clearly trying to butter me up, was disheartening. Instead of properly apologizing for their past actions, they tried to superficially make amends and win me over, which was nothing short of shallow. They probably didn't believe I would truly cut them off. Fed up and not wanting to say anything, I was repulsed by how sickeningly sweet they were trying to be and bluntly rejected them. "Buttering me up now won't change anything. I won't give you a penny anymore. Please leave." Realizing their strategy wasn't working, they instantly dropped their facade and began yelling in anger. "After we went out of our way to humble ourselves, you get all high and mighty. You dare talk back like that, you old hag. Just give us the money." Their true colors showed as they hurled unbearable insults at me. Their behavior lacked any decency, and all I could see was their appalling nature. Considering stopping this before it became a real nuisance to the neighborhood, my daughter-in-law yelled, "Hey, don't ignore us. and, in a fit of rage, threw a potted plant on the ground beside the entrance. It shattered with a loud noise. After a moment of silence, my son screamed again. "Just drop dead, you old witch. Then all your money will be mine." His wife nodded in agreement with his words. Shocked by their actions and my son's words, I paused for a moment. My son thinks he will inherit everything from me. After realizing what he said, I burst into laughter. They seem to be under a big misunderstanding. What are you talking about? You have no inheritance rights. Huh? Don't spout nonsense. My son and his wife did not want to believe me at all, but when I explained the facts to them, their faces gradually changed. In fact, I never legally adopted my son. Legally speaking, my son is just my husband's child from another marriage, and he has no right to my estate. For him to inherit anything from me, either adoption or a will written by me would be necessary, and of course, I have no intention of writing such a will. The only other option would be adoption, but I've already filed a non-acceptance declaration to ensure he can't adopt me without my consent. This means, unless I change my mind, it's impossible for my son to inherit anything from me. So, even if I pass away, you two won't get a dime from me. Now, if you understand, please leave. But my son and his wife, who clearly had been counting on my inheritance, were shocked by this revelation, lost for words and stunned. Even when prompted to leave, they didn't budge. Fed up, I casually picked up my smartphone and made a call. "Hello, is this the police?" My flower pot at home was broken. Yes, the perpetrator is still right in front of me. Could you come quickly to catch them? What? The police? I had called the local police station. I reported the incident of my daughter-in-law breaking the flower pot as property damage. Realizing I had called the police, they were terrified and fled from my house before the police arrived. Watching them hastily leave, I felt relieved, thinking I had finally resolved the problem that had been troubling me for years. By the way, after the flower pot was broken, I chose not to press charges since I wasn't injured, allowing the matter to be resolved without further action. I just wanted to get rid of my son and his wife without making a big fuss, thinking it could lead to more trouble or resentment if I did. I decided not to press charges over the broken flower pot since I wasn't injured, and it wasn't very expensive. Later, I heard through the grapevine that my son and his wife continued to live lavishly and were on the brink of ruining themselves financially. Despite not having access to my account, my daughter-in-law, assuming there was money in my son's account, didn't stop her extravagant spending and used credit cards. Her calculation was way off. There wasn't enough money in my son's account to cover her spending. As a result, my son was overwhelmed by the mortgage for their new home and his wife's spending, piling up debt after debt. The debt ballooned to an amount far beyond repayment, and in desperation, my son resorted to embezzling company funds. This was quickly discovered, and he was fired as a result. Burdened with debt and now jobless, his wife demanded a divorce, seeing no use in him any longer. However, my son refused to consent to the divorce, and their argument escalated into a legal battle. Shockingly, during the court proceedings, it was revealed that my grandson was not my son's child, indicating that his wife had been unfaithful. This added issues of alimony payments to the messy divorce, further complicating the situation. The two are still embroiled in a bitter court battle, hurling insults at each other. Meanwhile, I've finally been freed from the headache that was my son's family's problems and have been able to devote myself more passionately to my work. As a result, our company's sales have multiplied, bringing joy to my employees and raising my personal reputation. While there's no promotion or raise left for me to achieve, which I wasn't particularly interested in anyway, I feel more motivated to work hard for the sake of my employees who look up to me. Now alone in the spacious house that once held my family, I live here immersed in memories of my late husband. Every day, I smile and talk to his photo, spending my days in peace.